Fat Omega was given to the Triplet Alphas as punishment by her mother, but they loved her like no. Lyra stood at the edge of the road, her small figure dwarfed by the towering trees that lined the path to the northern keep. The cold wind whipped her dark hair across her face, but she barely noticed. Her heart was heavy, weighed down by shame and fear. Today, she was being sent away by her own mother, not as a gift, but as a punishment. Her mother's words had cut sharper than any blade. The Triplet Alphas will teach you your place. Perhaps then you will learn humility. Humility. The word felt like a chain around her chest. Lyra's stomach twisted, for she had long been a source of frustration to her mother. Her softness, her tenderness, and her unwanted weight seen as flaws in a world obsessed with perfection. The northern keep loomed in the distance, perched on jagged cliffs like a crown of stone over the valley below. Dark clouds clung to its towers, as if the very sky knew the danger and power that lived within. Legends whispered about the three alphas who ruled there: Rin, Kale, and Soren. Twins in appearance, yet bound by more than blood. Three souls intertwined by power, duty, and a curse older than the kingdom itself. They were feared even by kings, yet they were curious creatures, and rumor said that nothing, no threat, no plea, no weakness could sway their judgment once set. Lyra's carriage rattled over the uneven road, each jolt making her stomach lurch. She wanted to look away, to hide, but the road gave her no choice but to see the keep growing closer, each stone tower sharp against the dim sky. A servant, pale and silent, held the reins, casting occasional glances at her as though he pitied the path she had been forced to take. When she finally arrived at the massive iron gates, they were swung open by unseen hands, as if the keep itself acknowledged her presence. The stone walls rose like guardians of a secret, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and smoke. Lyra's hands trembled as she stepped down from the carriage, her boots crunching on frost-hardened gravel. A shadow moved before her, tall and broad, and she realized she was not yet alone. Rin, the eldest of the triplets, emerged from the main doorway. His eyes, dark and deep, measured her with a calm intensity that made her cheeks flush. He was a mountain of a man, broad-shouldered, yet his movements carried a strange, feline grace. "You are Lyra." His voice was low but not unkind. It carried authority, a subtle edge that could have crushed her in a second if he wished. Lyra nodded, her voice failing her. The words seemed trapped in her throat. Kale appeared next, a mirror of Rin in stature, though his gaze was sharper, colder, more calculating. Soren followed, the youngest, with a quiet, almost hidden presence that unsettled her more than the others. Together they formed a triad of power, unyielding and impossible to ignore. "You were sent here as a lesson." Soren's voice was soft, almost hesitant, yet beneath it was a weight that made her shiver. Lyra swallowed hard. "Yes, my lady mother thought I should learn respect." The triplets exchanged glances. It was a look that spoke volumes without words. Rin's hand brushed a carved stone railing, Kale's jaw tightened, and Soren's lips pressed into a thin line. Lyra couldn't read their expressions fully, but she sensed a strange curiosity in their eyes. They did not look at her with scorn or ridicule as she had feared. Instead, there was an interest that unsettled her, a tension that wrapped around her chest like a vine. They led her through the massive gates, the heavy doors closing behind her with a hollow echo. The keep was vast inside, dimly lit with torches and lanterns, shadows dancing on stone walls that whispered secrets of centuries past. Lyra could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears as the triplets guided her through corridors lined with ancient tapestries depicting hunts, battles, and strange, ethereal creatures. "This will be your room," Kale said, opening a heavy door to reveal a chamber that was surprisingly warm and inviting. A large bed with deep, soft blankets dominated the room, and a fireplace glowed with flickering light. Despite the cold stone walls and high ceiling, it felt safe. "Thank you," Lyra murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. She did not know why she felt the need to speak, but the sound of her own voice calmed her in ways she did not understand. "You will not be alone in this keep," Rin said, closing the door behind them. "We will watch, we will teach, but you must learn your place and perhaps your strength." Lyra nodded again, though her stomach twisted. She wanted to ask questions to understand why her mother had chosen this punishment, why fate had brought her here. But words failed her. Days passed. The triplets were both terrifying and intriguing. They never mocked her, never tried to humiliate her in the ways she had feared. Instead, they tested her in subtle ways, placing her in situations where she had to choose courage over comfort, asking her to prove her loyalty, her patience, her heart. Lyra found herself watching them as much as they watched her. Rin's quiet confidence and unshakable composure fascinated her. Kale's sharp mind and fierce control made her pulse race with both fear and admiration. Soren's gentle, hidden strength drew her in with a magnetic pull she could not resist. She realized, with a strange mixture of awe and terror, that she was learning more than obedience. She was learning the weight of power, the sharp edge of responsibility, and the strange warmth of connection in a world that had never allowed her such luxuries. One evening, she wandered into the garden under the silver light of a full moon. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of frost-bitten flowers and pine. She thought she was alone, but a shadow moved in the moonlight. "Do you like it here?" Kale's voice cut softly through the quiet, and Lyra turned to see him standing at the edge of the garden path, his eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. I don't know," she admitted. "I am afraid but also curious." Kale stepped closer, his gaze intense but not threatening. "Curiosity is the first step to strength," he said, "and perhaps understanding." Lyra felt a flutter in her chest, a warmth she had never known before. She wanted to speak, to ask him why he looked at her that way, but the words seemed to vanish. Instead, she merely nodded, a silent acknowledgement that she had begun to notice the shift not just in him, but in herself. Days turned into weeks. Lyra adapted to the keep's strange rhythms, the quiet, tense meals, the lessons that were part strategy, part survival. She discovered the triplets' secret. They shared a bond far deeper than she had imagined, one that linked their hearts as well as their minds. And yet in that bond there was room for her, a place she had never expected to find. One night, she awoke to a strange sound. Soft whispers floated through the halls, shadows moving in the flickering torchlight. She crept to the window and looked out over the valley. Below, the wind roared through the cliffs and the keep seemed alive with its own pulse. A single thought struck her, sharp and undeniable. She was no longer just a punishment, just a pawn in her mother's cruel game. Here, she had power. Not the same as the triplets, not yet, but a quiet strength that had begun to bloom inside her. And with that strength came something more dangerous, longing. Longing for their presence, their approval, their attention. Rin's gaze had followed her as she wandered. Kale had stood in the shadows, silent but aware. Soren had smiled softly when she had stumbled in the library, offering her a book as if understanding that knowledge could be a shield and a key at once. Lyra's heart swelled and ached all at once. She had been sent to the northern keep as a punishment, and yet here she was, learning that fear and love could exist side by side, that power could be tempered by gentleness, that three strangers could hold her heart without demanding it. And then, as the moon reached its zenith, she heard a whisper in the hall behind her. "Do you feel it too?" She froze. The voice was soft, familiar, and tinged with something dangerous. Turning slowly, she met Kale's eyes, and in them, she saw not judgment, not anger, but something else. Something that made her chest tighten, made the air seem too thin, made the frost outside feel like fire. "Yes," she whispered, unsure of what she admitted, yet unable to deny it. A breeze stirred the curtains, and for a moment the world outside vanished. She realized that she had stepped into a story far larger than herself, a tale of power, longing, and fate. One that might change her or consume her entirely. And deep in the shadows, the triplets watched, their own hearts stirring in ways they had not anticipated. The punishment that had brought her here had already begun to unravel everything. For Lyra, the keep was no longer a prison. It was a crucible, and she could not yet see what fire awaited her. The northern keep had grown into a strange rhythm for Lyra. Each day was a mixture of wonder and fear, of lessons and tests, of quiet observation and subtle challenge. The triplets, ever watchful, were both guides and judges. They did not command her with cruelty, but with presence and authority, and that was far more terrifying. Rin often appeared in her path without announcement, his shadow stretching across corridors like a silent warning. Kale observed with sharp eyes from high balconies or hidden corners, his gaze almost always seeming to see through her, reading her thoughts and fears as easily as words. Soren, quiet and careful, lingered where he could be unnoticed, offering gestures of kindness that made her heart ache, a warm scarf tossed on a cold morning, a soft voice guiding her through a complicated corridor of the keep. Lyra had begun to learn the keep's many secrets. The library held books older than the kingdom itself, some with whispers that seemed to follow her eyes across the page. The gardens, hidden behind high stone walls, bloomed only in moonlight, and the frost-touched petals glimmered like stars fallen to earth. It was in these gardens that Lyra found herself most alive, free to breathe, free to think, and yet never free from the gaze of the triplets. One evening, as silver light washed the frozen grounds, Lyra wandered among the moonlit blooms. The air smelled of pine and frost, sharp and sweet. She paused to touch a petal, marveling at the way it glowed beneath her fingers, and then felt a presence behind her. "You are drawn to this place," Kale said softly. He stepped from the shadows, tall and silent, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. Lyra turned quickly, startled, but did not step back. There was something in Kale's expression, a mixture of curiosity and something else that made her heart flutter. I like it here," she said, her voice trembling. "It feels peaceful." Kale studied her for a moment, and then, to her surprise, he smiled faintly. It was a rare thing, a crack in the armor he wore so carefully. "Peace is dangerous," he said. "It can make you soft or strong. It depends on what you do with it." Lyra felt a shiver run down her spine. His words were simple but heavy, like a weight pressing against her chest. She wanted to ask what he meant, but the right words would not come. Instead, she nodded, feeling both frightened and drawn closer to him. The nights in the keep were filled with whispers and shadows. Lyra began to notice that the triplets did not simply observe her, they tested her in ways subtle and profound. Rin would place her in situations where she had to choose courage over fear. Standing on the balcony above the frozen cliffs, facing the roaring wind without flinching. Kale challenged her mind, asking riddles and questions that demanded not only intelligence but insight into herself. Soren challenged her heart, encouraging her to trust, to care, to notice the beauty and danger of the world around her. Through these lessons, Lyra began to change. She had been timid, afraid of failure, unsure of her own worth. But here, in the northern keep, surrounded by the triplets' quiet power, she began to understand that she was not weak. She had strength, even if it was subtle, even if it was fragile at first. One morning, as snow fell softly against the high windows, Lyra sat in the library reading by candlelight. The triplets were elsewhere, but she could feel their presence as surely as if they were in the room with her. She turned a page and found a drawing delicate and strange. 3 figures bound by chains of light, their faces shadowed, yet their hands reaching toward a single figure in the center. Her breath caught. It was them, the triplets, and the figure in the center, it resembled her. Footsteps echoed in the library, and she looked up to see Rin standing in the doorway. "You noticed," he said simply. I don't understand," Lyra whispered. "What does it mean?" Rin stepped closer, his gaze intense. "It means you are part of something larger. Something we have not allowed ourselves to hope for." Lyra's pulse quickened. Part of her wanted to ask, hope for what? But fear held her tongue. Instead, she nodded slowly, sensing that whatever he meant, it was both dangerous and true. The days that followed were filled with quiet tension. Lyra noticed how the triplets watched each other when she was near, how their hands would brush against one another in passing, how their eyes would linger a moment too long on her face. She realized that their bond was not merely one of blood and power. It was a connection deeper than she could name, and her presence had begun to change it. One evening, the three alphas gathered in the main hall. The firelight flickered across their faces, casting long shadows on the stone walls. Lyra had been asked to join them, though she did not know why. She stepped forward, feeling the weight of their gaze, and found herself trembling despite her growing strength. "Lyra," Rin said, his voice low and commanding, "you have learned more than we expected. You are stronger than you know, braver than you realize, but strength alone is not enough." Kale's sharp eyes met hers. "You must understand the weight of power. To stand with us is to accept not only protection but responsibility, not only safety but danger." Soren stepped closer, his voice gentle. "And to care, truly care, is to risk your own heart. You must decide if you are willing." Lyra's chest tightened. She felt both fear and longing, a pull toward them that was impossible to resist. I want to understand," she said finally. "I want to be part of this." The triplets exchanged looks, and for a moment she feared she had spoken too boldly. But then Rin nodded slowly. "Then you will see, but be warned. What you learn here may change you forever." The next days were filled with lessons that tested more than her mind or body. The triplets showed her the history of their family, the curse that bound them, the magic that both protected and trapped them. Lyra learned that their power was a blessing and a burden, that their hearts were strong but fragile, that their bond with one another was as unyielding as it was sacred. And through it all, Lyra's own heart began to awaken. She noticed the way Rin's hand lingered on a railing near her, the way Kale's eyes searched hers when she spoke, the quiet way Soren would stand nearby, offering silent support. Their attention was intense, yet never forced. It was a storm held at bay, a fire waiting to ignite. One night, as the moon rose high over the frozen cliffs, Lyra wandered into the enchanted garden. The snow glimmered like powdered diamonds, and the air was crisp and sharp. She felt a presence behind her before she saw him. "Rin." "You should not be out here alone," he said softly. I could not sleep," she admitted. "The wind, the snow, it makes me feel alive." He nodded slowly, studying her. "It can also make you aware of what you desire, and sometimes what you fear." Lyra felt her heart leap. She knew he spoke not only of the wind and snow but of her own feelings, the emotions she could not yet name. I am afraid," she whispered. "And I am curious, about you and them and myself." Rin's hand brushed against hers, a fleeting touch, yet electric. Lyra felt a warmth bloom in her chest, a mixture of fear and longing she had never experienced. "Curiosity is dangerous," he said, "but it can also lead to understanding. You must choose which path you take." Before she could answer, a shadow moved at the edge of the garden. Kale emerged silently, his gaze sharp and unreadable. Soren followed, a faint smile on his lips. Together, the three alphas formed a circle around her, not threatening but commanding, their presence overwhelming. "You see now," Kale said, his voice low and measured, "that this is not a simple punishment. You are here for more than learning obedience. You are here to discover what lies in the hearts of those who seem untouchable." Lyra's breath caught. She realized in that moment that she was no longer an outsider. She was part of something larger, something powerful and fragile and dangerous. And she wanted it, even if it terrified her. The triplets watched her with intensity, and for the first time, Lyra understood that their interest in her was not pity or duty. It was fascination, and perhaps something closer to affection. As the wind whispered through the garden, carrying the scent of frost and pine, Lyra felt a stirring deep within her heart, a longing for connection, for understanding, for acceptance. She knew that the path ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges, tests, and dangers. But for the first time, she also knew that she did not face it alone. And somewhere in the shadows, hidden from view, the magic of the keep seemed to pulse with approval, as if recognizing that a new chapter had begun, a chapter of courage, desire, and the slow, inevitable awakening of hearts bound together by fate. The northern keep had grown colder as winter deepened, the frost clinging to the stone walls and the frozen branches outside whispering in the wind. Lyra walked through the long corridors, her boots echoing softly against the marble floors. The air was heavy with the quiet of the keep, but she no longer felt fear as she once had. She felt power, but of a different kind, the power of knowledge, understanding, and the subtle influence she had begun to hold over the triplets. Rin, Kale, and Soren had become more than teachers or guardians to her. They were her anchors, her storms, and sometimes her mirrors. She had begun to notice their vulnerabilities, the small, human moments hidden beneath the masks of control and authority. Rin's rare hesitation when he thought no one was watching, Kale's quiet sighs when alone, Soren's fleeting smiles that seemed to carry unspoken pain. Each revealed that beneath their power, they carried burdens and secrets as heavy as the mountains that surrounded their keep. One evening, Lyra wandered into the library, her fingers tracing the spines of ancient tomes. She paused at a book bound in deep blue leather, the edges of the pages gilded with silver. She opened it, and a strange light seemed to glow from the text. The pages described the history of the triplets, family rulers who had been gifted great power, yet cursed with isolation, and a bond that could not easily be broken. Lyra read about the curse in silence. The triplets' strength grew when they were together, yet they were haunted by visions and shadows that threatened to tear them apart. Their hearts were bound to one another, yet the bond demanded sacrifice, vigilance, and restraint. She understood then why they were so distant, why their power was both awe-inspiring and frightening. Footsteps echoed behind her, and she turned to see Soren standing quietly in the doorway. His eyes were soft, yet serious. "You found the truth," he said. I understand now," Lyra whispered. "Your strength, it is tied to you three being together, and your hearts, they are not free." Soren nodded. "Yes, and your presence changes it. You are no longer just a witness, Lyra. You are part of the chain now." Her chest tightened. I don't know if I am ready." "You are," he said softly, "more than you realize, but it will be difficult and painful." Lyra's nights were now filled with dreams that blurred the line between reality and the strange magic of the keep. She would walk through shadowed halls, hand in hand with all three, and yet feel the weight of their burdens pressing down on her. Sometimes the wind would carry whispers, voices of the past warning her to leave to protect herself. And yet she could not. She could not leave the keep, could not leave the triplets. The bond she felt toward them had grown in intensity, a quiet but unshakable pull. She admired Rin's unyielding strength, felt her heart race at Kale's sharp attention, and drew comfort from Soren's quiet care. And each day, she noticed the way they noticed her, a lingering glance, a hand brushing against hers, the small moments of vulnerability they allowed her to witness. One morning, as the frost melted slightly under the weak winter sun, Lyra found herself in the courtyard, practicing balance on the edge of a frozen fountain. The ice was slippery, but she moved carefully, trying to master the delicate steps. Rin appeared at her side without a sound, his presence filling the space with authority. "You are careful," he said, his voice low and even. "Yet you must trust yourself more. Fear will hold you back." Lyra looked up at him, her cheeks pink from cold and effort. I am trying," she admitted. "Trying is not enough," he said gently. "You must believe." Kale stepped out from the shadowed archway, his sharp gaze studying her. "Belief without knowledge is dangerous," he said, "but knowledge without courage is useless. You must find the balance." Soren appeared silently, standing just behind her, "And you are not alone in it," he said softly. "We are here, but the choice is yours." Lyra's heart pounded. She felt both overwhelmed and exhilarated. She realized that the triplets were not merely testing her strength or courage. They were teaching her to find her own power, to claim it, and to understand the depth of connection that existed between them all. The following days were filled with lessons both subtle and profound. They led her through the halls, teaching her strategy and observation, and showing her the nuances of leadership and diplomacy. She began to notice the interactions between the triplets, how they moved as one, yet each carried a different energy. Rin was steadfast and commanding, Kale was sharp and calculating, Soren was quiet and comforting. Together, they were stronger than any one of them could be alone, and she realized that her presence had begun to complete the circle in ways none of them had expected. One night, a storm rolled in, dark clouds covering the sky. Lyra sat by the window, watching the wind whip the trees outside. The triplets approached her quietly, one by one, their faces serious. "Lyra," Rin said, his voice low, "there is something you must see." They led her to the main hall, where the firelight danced across the stone walls. In the center of the room, a mirror stood, framed in silver runes. As she looked into it, she saw not her reflection, but visions, the triplets as children, carrying the weight of power too heavy for their young shoulders. She saw the battles they had fought, the isolation they had endured, the moments when fear had nearly broken them. "They have been tested all their lives," Kale said softly, "but you are changing the balance. You give them something they have never had: trust, affection, understanding." Lyra's chest ached. I do not know if I am enough." Soren stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. "You are more than enough. You are the key to our hearts, to our strength, but it is not without risk. You must be brave and patient." Lyra swallowed, feeling the weight of his words. She realized that love and loyalty in the keep were not simple. They were intertwined with duty, power, and destiny. Yet despite the dangers, despite the weight of their history, she could not turn away. She wanted to be part of it, to stand with them, to share their burdens and their hearts. The following week, a challenge arrived that tested not only her courage but her understanding of the triplets' bond. A shadow from her past appeared at the gates of the keep, a messenger from her mother, bearing a warning and a threat. Lyra felt fear rise, but she did not falter. She stood in the courtyard with the triplets at her side, feeling their strength support her. "This is the moment," Rin said. "You must decide where your loyalty lies, with fear or with us." Lyra's hands trembled, but she did not step back. "With you," she said firmly. "I choose to stand with you." Kale's gaze softened, and Soren's hand found hers, giving a quiet squeeze. Together they faced the messenger, and though words were exchanged, Lyra understood the deeper truth. She was no longer a pawn. She was a partner, a part of their story, a force that could not be ignored. That night the storm raged around the keep, thunder shaking the walls. Lyra sat in the garden, her fingers brushing the frost-covered petals. She felt the presence of the triplets behind her, their energy surrounding her like a protective circle. She understood now that their connection was deeper than she had imagined. She could feel their emotions, their care, and the quiet affection that had grown like a hidden flame in the heart of the keep. "You have grown," Rin said softly, "stronger than the winds, steadier than the cliffs." Kale's eyes held a spark she had never seen before. "And braver than the fear that haunted you." Soren's hand brushed hers again, warm and reassuring. "And your heart has begun to awaken, not just to us but to the truth of who you are." Lyra felt tears prick her eyes. She realized that the punishment that had brought her here had become the most important chapter of her life. She had learned courage, strength, and the delicate power of connection. And yet, even as she felt hope, a shadow lingered, a reminder that the world beyond the keep was not safe, and that the bonds they shared would be tested in ways she could not yet imagine. The night deepened, and the storm subsided, leaving silence in its wake. Lyra stood, feeling the frost under her feet and the warmth of the triplets' presence behind her. She understood that love, trust, and courage were not simple. They were forged in trials, in the weight of curses, and in the quiet strength of hearts willing to hold one another through the storm. And as the first light of dawn touched the frozen landscape, Lyra knew that the next chapter would demand even more of her. Her heart was no longer hers alone. It belonged in part to the three who had shown her both fear and longing, danger and comfort. And though she could not yet see what lay ahead, she knew one thing. She would face it with them and perhaps, in doing so, discover the true power of love, loyalty, and redemption. Winter's grip on the northern keep began to loosen as the first hints of spring touched the frozen cliffs. Snow melted into rivulets that traced silver paths along the stone walls. The air was sharper, filled with the scent of pine and wet earth. Lyra walked along the balcony, her hair lifted by the wind, her heart heavy with thought. The past weeks had changed everything. She had grown stronger, braver, and more certain of herself. The lessons of the triplets, Rin, Kale, and Soren, had taught her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. And yet, she knew the greatest challenge still awaited them all, the curse that had shadowed the triplets for decades, a darkness that threatened to claim their hearts and their keep. Rin approached her silently, his steps almost lost in the roar of the wind. "Lyra," he said, voice low but firm, "tonight we confront the shadow that has haunted us. Are you ready?" Lyra turned to him, meeting his gaze. "I am," she said. She could feel the power of the keep thrumming beneath her feet, the energy of the triplets surrounding her like a protective circle. "I am ready to face it with you." Kale appeared then, sharp and commanding, his eyes reflecting the storm clouds gathering above the cliffs. "It will not be easy," he said. "The curse is strong. It will test everything, your courage, your heart, and the bond we share." Soren's hand found hers, warm and steady. "And we will be with you," he whispered, "every step of the way." The four of them moved through the corridors, past the silent halls, toward the chamber that held the magic of their ancestors. The room was vast, lined with carved stone runes that pulsed faintly in the dim light. A mirror, black as night, stood in the center, swirling with shadows that seemed alive. This was the heart of the curse, the place where the triplets' past and power converged. Rin stepped forward first, placing a hand on the mirror. "It begins now," he said. The shadows shifted, coiling around them, whispering in voices that echoed pain, fear, and regret. Kale raised his hand, summoning a barrier of light that flickered against the darkness. "Do not falter," he commanded. "The curse feeds on hesitation." Lyra stepped closer, her heart pounding. She reached out to touch the mirror, and a chill ran through her body. The shadows recoiled slightly at her presence, as if recognizing a new force had entered the circle. She drew a deep breath. "I am not afraid," she said, her voice strong despite the tremor she felt inside. "And I will not let you claim them, not now, not ever." Soren stepped beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Your courage is part of this," he said. "It binds us, strengthens us. Together we can face it." The shadows writhed, forming shapes of fearsome creatures, echoes of the triplets' memories, battles they had lost, moments of isolation, the pain of power without companionship. They lunged and swirled, but Lyra did not retreat. She focused on the warmth of the triplets' hands, on their presence, on the bond they had built over weeks of trust and understanding. "Now," Rin commanded. "Together." They placed their hands on hers, their energy flowing into her, a current of warmth, power, and trust. The mirror's darkness trembled. Whispers grew louder, then faded, until the shadows themselves seemed to hesitate. Lyra felt the weight of the curse pressing against her mind, threatening to drown her in fear. But she did not let it. "I am not alone," she whispered. "We are together." The words were like a key. The shadows shrieked and twisted, then slowly unraveled, drawn into the mirror, breaking apart into sparks of light that filled the chamber. The curse that had haunted the triplets for generations had begun to lift, not through force but through courage, trust, and love. Rin stepped back, breathing heavily, but his eyes held relief. Kale's sharp gaze softened and Soren smiled, a quiet, peaceful expression. Lyra felt her knees weaken and Rin caught her, steadying her with his strength. "You did it," Soren said softly, his hand still holding hers. "You helped us break it." Lyra shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. "We did it," she said, "together." The room glowed faintly with a golden light, the magic of the keep and the triplets' bond blending with hers. She felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of completion she had never known. She realized that she had not only changed them, but herself. She was no longer the timid girl sent as a punishment. She was part of a family, a bond that transcended fear, power, and curse. After the confrontation, the keep felt lighter, as if the walls themselves had breathed a sigh of relief. Lyra walked through the halls, her steps echoing softly, feeling the strength of the triplets beside her. The frost outside had begun to melt, revealing glimpses of green beneath the snow. Life was returning, slowly, beautifully, like the bond they shared. Rin led her to the balcony overlooking the cliffs. The wind carried the scent of pine and thawing snow. He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "You have changed everything," he said. "Not just the curse, but us." Kale joined them, his sharp gaze softened with warmth. "You have taught us what we have forgotten. That strength is not only in power, but in trust and love." Soren stepped closer, placing a hand on Lyra's shoulder. "And your heart has given us something we thought lost, a chance to be more than we ever imagined." Lyra looked at them, feeling her chest swell with emotion. I never wanted to be a punishment," she said softly, "but I see now that it brought me to you, to all of you." Rin's eyes darkened with emotion and he stepped closer. "You were never a punishment, Lyra. You were our salvation." Kale's hand brushed hers, warm and steady. "And the heart that will guide us forward." Soren smiled, quiet and gentle, yet full of unspoken emotion. "And the one who has taught us that love and courage are the same." Lyra felt tears fill her eyes. She realized that the journey she had feared, the punishment she had dreaded, had led her to this moment, a place of trust, love, and transformation. The triplets were no longer just powerful rulers. They were human, vulnerable, and yet stronger than ever because they had opened their hearts. And she was a part of that strength. As the sun began to rise over the cliffs, casting gold and pink across the frozen landscape, Lyra stood with the triplets at her side. She could feel the pulse of the keep, the magic of their bond, and the warmth of love that had grown quietly through fear, trust, and courage. "You are ready," Rin said finally, his voice low but certain, "to face the world together." Lyra nodded. She knew the road ahead would not be without challenges. Shadows still lingered beyond the walls of the keep and the world would test them. But she also knew this. They would face it together, bound not by duty alone but by trust, love, and the courage to protect one another. Kale's hand brushed hers once more, a silent promise. "No matter what comes, we stand as one." Soren's quiet voice followed, almost a whisper, "And nothing can break what we have built." Lyra felt the truth of their words deep within her heart. She had come to the northern keep as a punishment, unwanted and uncertain. And now she stood at the center of a bond stronger than any curse, brighter than any fear, and filled with the promise of hope, love, and redemption. For the first time in her life, she felt whole. And in the distance, beyond the cliffs and the forests, the wind carried a faint whisper, not of fear, but of promise. A promise that this family, this bond, would endure. That the triplets and the girl who had been given as punishment would face the world as one. And that together they could overcome anything. Lyra closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of their hands and hearts surrounding her. The past, with all its pain and punishment, had led her to this place. And the future, full of uncertainty, now held a certainty she had never known, that love, courage, and trust could break even the oldest curses. She opened her eyes and looked at them, and in that gaze they all understood. The story of punishment had ended. The story of redemption, of transformation, of hearts intertwined was only beginning. Together, they stood on the balcony, watching the sunrise over the northern cliffs, ready to face whatever the world would bring. And Lyra knew, with every fiber of her being, that she was home.